All right, so today we're going to dive deep into a pretty fascinating question about how civilization, as we know it, began. We've got some excerpts from Will Durant's Our Oriental Heritage to guide us, specifically the preface and a chapter that focuses on the political elements of civilization. And Durant, he makes a pretty compelling case that to truly understand ourselves, we really need to look beyond those familiar narratives of Greece and Rome and stories eastward.
And what's so fascinating about Durant's work is that he kind of challenges this notion that humans are just inherently wired for these complex societies. And he even quotes Aristotle saying man is not willingly a political animal. It's almost counterintuitive.
It totally is. You think of ancient Greece with their city-states and their philosophers and their whole system of governance, and it just feels like they were practically born for it.
Right. And yet Durant uses this quote to really highlight just how different life was for early hunter-gatherers. Groups like the Bushmen, the Pygmies, or the Tasmanians, they just weren't structured around governments or these strict hierarchies. They would come together for specific tasks, but ultimately they valued individual freedom.
So are we saying our ancestors were basically like the original minimalists?
In a way, yeah.
Like just living off the land, no bureaucracy, just pure survival and autonomy.
Yeah, they had this minimal governance, which might seem pretty idyllic.
Yeah.
Some of us today, drowning in rules and regulations.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But if humans weren't naturally inclined toward building these states, what on earth shifted?
Well, Durant argues that war, not a love of order, was the catalyst.
Really?
As counterintuitive as it sounds, conflict forced people to organize, to create these hierarchies, to choose leaders who could guide them through these really tumultuous times.
Okay, so instead of like a peaceful evolution toward order, it was more like trial by fire.
Exactly, yeah.
What survival of the fittest, or those who could adapt and organize under pressure thrived.
Exactly.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that it was often peaceful agricultural societies that were conquered by these nomadic warriors, which led to the rise of ruling classes. It's like the saying, the strong take from the weak.
Yeah.
Played out on like a historical scale.
It really flips the script on how we typically think about the origins of civilization, doesn't it?
It does.
We tend to picture this gradual progression towards sophistication, but Durant is suggesting it was much more turbulent and, dare I say, violent.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the most striking examples he gives is the French aristocracy. We think of them as this refined, elegant class, but their roots actually lie in the Germanic conquerors who invaded centuries ago.
Wow. It makes you wonder how many other seemingly established power structures around the world have similar origins, born out of conflict and conquest. It really challenges us to look deeper and question the narratives we've been told.
It certainly does, yeah. And speaking of challenging narratives, Durant's exploration of the evolution of law is equally fascinating.
Okay.
He starts by highlighting the human instinct for revenge, that primal eye for an eye mentality that transcends cultures and eras.
You see that everywhere, from ancient Rome to the Code of Hammurabi.
Right.
But obviously societies couldn't function for long. With everyone just seeking personal revenge, it would be complete chaos.
Right, and that's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay.
Durant points out this really crucial step where society shifted from seeking blood to demanding compensation. So instead of taking a life for a life, you could demand gold, goods, even livestock as payment for the wrong that was done to you.
It's like a proto-legal system, right? A way to establish some semblance of order and fairness without descending into these endless cycles of violence.
Precisely. And what I find so engaging about Durant's writing is how he brings this to life with these really vivid examples.
Okay.
He talks about the Code of Hammurabi, which meticulously lists fines for everything imaginable, from a lost tooth to a life. And you can almost picture those ancient scribes painstakingly recording every possible offense and its corresponding penalty.
It's like they were trying to create a comprehensive guide to conflict resolution, covering every possible scenario.
Yeah, and then there's this almost comical story from Abyssinia. A boy accidentally falls out of a tree and kills another child.
Oh, no.
And the judges rule that the grieving mother can have another son climb the same tree and fall on the first boy's neck.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. That definitely takes an eye for an eye to a whole new level.
It does.
But it highlights how even those seemingly absurd judgments were attempts to establish order, to provide a framework for resolving disputes.
Exactly. And this need for order led to the development of courts, where chiefs, elders, or priests would act as these arbitrators, essentially becoming the first judges. But it wasn't all about formal courts and codified laws, right?
Right.
Durant also emphasizes the importance of custom, those unwritten rules that govern behavior and maintain social order.
Yeah, it's like some unspoken code of conduct we still follow today. Those unwritten rules that shape our interactions.
Right.
And dictate what's considered acceptable behavior.
Right.
You know, we might not even realize how much our actions are governed by custom until we encounter a culture where those unwritten rules are completely different.
And that brings us to the evolution of another fundamental social structure, the family.
Okay.
Just like with the state and the law. The family's journey through history is full of these unexpected twists and turns, starting with this fascinating concept of mother right.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Mother right sounds like it might turn our modern notions of family upside down. What exactly did that entail?
Well, mother right describes societies where lineage and inheritance and even social standing were determined through the mother's line, not the father's. Imagine that.
Right.
A world where your family tree branches out from your mother, not your father.
That really flips the script on what we consider like traditional family structures today. It almost sounds like a proto-feminist society where women held a more central role.
It's not quite a matriarchy in the sense of, women ruling over men. But it does challenge our assumptions about the universality of male dominance. In these societies, the father's role was often less defined or significant, especially in terms of kinship and inheritance.
You mentioned earlier that the Trobriand Islanders held some fascinating beliefs about family lineage. Can you tell us more about them and how they fit into this idea of mother right?
Absolutely. The Trobriand Islanders, who live off the coast of Papua New Guinea, they believe that spirits called Paloma are responsible for pregnancy.
Okay.
They don't see a direct biological link between a father and his child. Instead, a woman becomes pregnant when a Paloma spirit enters her womb, and this spirit is associated with her maternal lineage.
So it's like their entire understanding of conception and family ties is rooted in this spiritual belief system, completely different from our modern biological understanding.
Exactly. And this belief really reinforces the importance of the mother's line. Since the father isn't seen as the direct source of the child's spirit, lineage and inheritance just naturally flow through the mother's family.
It's amazing how these cultural beliefs shape our most fundamental understanding of family and belonging. But if mother right was so prevalent, how did we end up with the patriarchal systems that have dominated for so much of history?
Well, Durant argues that this shift is really closely linked to the rise of agriculture. As societies transition from hunting and gathering to cultivating crops and managing livestock, control over these resources and the land itself became really crucial.
So it wasn't a sudden overthrow of mother right, but rather a gradual shift in power dynamics driven by these economic changes.
Precisely. As agriculture became more complex, men, being physically stronger, naturally assumed the more labor-intensive roles. This control over essential resources gave them greater economic power, which gradually translated into social and political dominance.
It's fascinating how something as seemingly straightforward as the way we produce food can have these profound ripple effects throughout society, shaping everything from family structures to gender roles.
And unfortunately, this shift often came at a significant cost for women. As patriarchy took hold, they lost their central role in family and social structures, becoming increasingly marginalized and subject to male authority.
Durant doesn't shy away from describing just how dramatic this change was for women, does he?
He doesn't.
He talks about them becoming essentially property, bought and sold in marriage, with little to no control over their own lives.
Yeah, and he provides some truly sobering examples. In some cultures, wives were expected to be buried alive with their husbands or commit suicide to accompany them to the afterlife.
It's hard to fathom those practices today. It highlights how deeply entrenched those patriarchal beliefs became, dictating not only women's social standing, but also controlling their very right to exist.
It's a dark chapter in human history, and it raises important questions about how power dynamics, once established, can become so deeply ingrained in societies. And it makes you wonder how those ancient power structures might still influence our perceptions of gender roles and relationships today even if in much more subtle ways.
It's like those echoes of the past we talked about earlier, those persistent patterns that keep resurfacing, even as we strive to create a more equitable world.
Speaking of persistent patterns, Durant's exploration of early religious beliefs reveals another fascinating parallel between societal shifts and these evolving spiritual views.
Okay.
He shows how religion wasn't just this separate sphere of life. It was deeply intertwined with politics, social order, and even those shifting family dynamics we've been discussing.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear how this all connects. What did the spiritual landscape look like in those early civilizations?
Well, what's particularly striking is the prevalence of female deities in many early cultures. These weren't just minor goddesses. They were often powerful figures, representing fertility, the earth, creation itself. They held a central place in the spiritual beliefs of those early societies, mirroring the prominence of women in mother rights systems.
So as societies transitioned towards patriarchy and male dominance, did the gods change too?
That's exactly what Durant highlights. It's this fascinating mirroring effect. As men gained control over resources and social structures, those powerful female deities gradually gave way to male gods, often depicted as stern, authoritarian figures.
It's like the divine order was being rewritten to reflect the new earthly order.
Exactly. These new patriarchal gods often embodied the qualities associated with male rulers: strength, authority, control. They became the ultimate legitimizers of the new power structures.
Did this shift in religious beliefs also affect how laws were created and enforced? Was there a connection between divine authority and the legal systems of these early civilizations?
Absolutely. Religion and law were deeply intertwined. The gods weren't seen as these distant, abstract figures. They were active participants in human affairs, setting down moral codes, punishing transgressions, and upholding justice. Many early legal codes were even presented as being divinely inspired.
It's like the ancient version of divine right of kings, but on a cosmic scale. If the laws are seen as the will of the gods, who would dare to question or disobey them?
Exactly. By linking law and religion, rulers could imbue their authority with this sense of sacredness and inevitability. It was a brilliant strategy for solidifying power. And it raises interesting questions about how religious beliefs have been used throughout history, both to justify and to challenge authority.
It's that duality of religion, isn't it? It can be a force for control, but also a source of resistance and liberation.
And that tension between the desire for order and the yearning for individual freedom is a thread that runs through Durant's entire analysis of the origins of civilization.
It's like that age-old struggle between the individual and society. We want the security that comes with structure and rules, but we also crave the freedom to chart our own course. And that tension is something we still grapple with today. It's just incredible to think how intertwined all these elements are, like war and law and family and religion, all shaping the very fabric of civilization as we know it.
It really is.
Durant really paints a picture of this complex tapestry where each thread plays this crucial role in the overall design.
He does, and it challenges us to rethink that traditional narrative of civilization as this straightforward march of progress. It was much more messy, more contingent on specific circumstances and historical events.
Just like what we talked about with the French aristocracy, right? Their origins lie in conquest, which challenges this image of inherent refinement and elegance that we often associate with them.
Exactly.
It reminds us that even the most seemingly established structures have these surprising and sometimes unsettling backstories.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most valuable takeaways from Durant's work is that it encourages us to question those assumptions, to dig deeper, and uncover the complexities hidden beneath the surface.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into our Oriental heritage, what are some key insights that you hope listeners will take away?
I would say the biggest takeaway is that civilization's origins are far more nuanced and multifaceted than we often assume. It wasn't just this simple evolution from savagery to enlightenment. It was a process shaped by conflict and adaptation. And this constant interplay between individual desires and societal pressures.
It's like realizing that the story of civilization isn't just about grand monuments and technological advancements, but also about these fundamental social structures like the state, the law, the family, religion, and how they've evolved alongside our material progress.
Precisely. And by understanding those intertwined threads, we can better appreciate the complexities of our own world. We start to see those echoes of the past in our present, those patterns that continue to shape our societies and our lives.
And I think Durant leaves us with a particularly thought-provoking question, one that's resonated with thinkers throughout history. He asks, if the state arose from war and conquest, can truly peaceful societies ever exist? Or is conflict just an inherent part of the human story?
It's a question that challenges us to consider the very nature of humanity and the societies we create. Can we break free from those cycles of violence and domination? Or are they just woven into the very fabric of our existence?
It's a question worth pondering, for sure. And I think Durant would encourage everyone to explore these themes further, to delve into our Oriental heritage and just see where their own journey through the history of civilization leads them.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe through that exploration, we might even find some answers, or at least a deeper understanding of this complex, fascinating, and sometimes contradictory thing we call civilization that